Identity crisis.
All right, welcome guys.
Mike?
This is the Slime City Massacre panel with director Greg Lamberson and Debbie Rochon, the star of Slime City Massacre.
One of the ensemble.
Yes, I agree. But I have to say Debbie's performance in the movie is definitely a memorable one. So I guess we could start with this. I will start with you, Greg. How did you come up with the idea to make Slime City Massacre?
Now, the people who attended the screening, no one has seen the original film. So let me just say that the original film, which is an 80s New York sleaze movie, was a contemporary back then story about a guy who moves into an apartment building and his neighbors feed him the wine and the yogurt, and he becomes possessed by one person, Zachary, who we never see in that film. In one scene he turns over a book and you just see this guy looking sort of like the Phantom of the Opera. In a paragraph of dialogue we explain that this cult committed suicide. When we tried to make our first foreign sales deal, the rep kept insisting that we had to open the scene with a murder. I said, but my story doesn't start with a murder, it's a gradual possession thing. But I kind of thought about, I guess we could shoot a scene with Zachary committing suicide in front of his followers. Never went that avenue, but that scene always existed in my head. 20 years later, after the film had been released on VHS and DVD twice each and sold around the world, I was pursuing a career as a novelist and it was starting to go well. And then this damn film had its 20th anniversary, so I started going on conventions and film festivals with different actors from the first film. And one festival in particular was the Beloit International Film Festival in Wisconsin, which is a place where they treat all the filmmakers like stars and the whole town turns out. It wasn't even a horror festival, but that was myself and Robert Sabin and Mary Bogle were the stars of that film. And Robert plays Zachary in this film and Mary is the bag lady who shows up with the meat cleaver. And I had kind of had this idea for a sequel. I knew I wanted it to be really far out and as different as possible from the first film. And for some reason, maybe because it wasn't a horror festival, the three of us were put in a hotel across the state line where no one else was. So we were able to hang out all day in the middle of February in the hot tub or in the swimming pool, and I sprang my idea on them. And they both said, oh yeah, Craig, you'll never do it, because I hadn't made a film in 10 years. And I went straight home and wrote the script. And I don't outline my stories, I just try and improvise and surprise myself and just tried to make it as wacky as I could to differentiate it from the first one. And that is how it came together. The script, I will say the script that I started to write was very different from the one that we ended up shooting, because instead of being about 4 people, it was about 5. And the idea was that the couple, Keelan and Jen, in this film, they come across 3 people who have already been possessed, and it would have been very much like the first film in that sense. And the female would not have gotten possessed, and she just would have been fighting the brains at the end. Because I realized it was too many characters and made the heroine one of the people who got possessed, I think it added a whole new level to it, and that's sort of what dictated that Mary's character from the first one come back and fight the brains. The end of the first film ends with her fighting one single brain and chopping it up, so this one, she goes against 3 and loses.
Okay, and this would be my question for you. How did you first get involved in getting in Slime City Massacre?
Do I need this? Is this better?
You got
It
it?
doesn't match.
I'll meet.
Will you? Will you?
Yes, I promise.
Well, I'd known Greg through the movie Slime City. I hadn't seen his other movies at that point, and I knew he was writing books. So I was a big fan of the original, going way back, because I loved the Henenlotter movies, the Trauma movies, Street Trash. I really liked it all. And so I was familiar with Slime City. Greg had contacted me to do a little blurb for his book, I was going to say something else, it's a different book. Cheap Scares. And he sent it to me and I did, and that's how I initially had contact with him. And he said to me, you know, I'm doing Slime City Massacre, and you know, would you have an interest in being involved potentially? And I said, oh, hell yeah, because I loved the first movie. I said, that was, you know, that's like a dream to be in a sequel to one of your favorite cult movies. So he wrote the script, and over time, like it was probably a year or about a year from the first time we spoke about it to when the shooting began in Buffalo at the abandoned terminal. And that's how I initially got involved.
I will say I actually wrote the part for Debbie, and in all of my films, generally I write the leads for people I know, and this was the first time that I wrote a part for someone I didn't know, and it was primarily because I had watched some of her movies writing this book on filmmaking called Cheap Scares. And, it worked out gloriously.
Yeah, if by chance any of you guys aren't familiar with Greg's work and the stuff that he's done, he started making movies when video was just dying. And he was one of the few people that actually kind of trudged through it and still made movies and is still here right now doing it. Because most of the other people have quit, given up, there's not money in it. I'm sure Greg could give you horror story after horror story about this.
Yeah.
But I want to throw this question to you, because I had interviewed you for the Gutmunchers podcast, and we talked about how Slime City first came to be on video. Could you kind of compare what it was like putting a movie out then and now?
Unfortunately, it's very similar. When I shot Slime City in 1986, the video industry was booming, and by the time we finished it in '88, the market had imploded. Nobody was paying advances. It was hard to get distributed. There was a glut in the market because there was so much shot on video stuff. And now we see the exact same thing has happened on DVD. I feel I finally made a movie I'm really proud of, and the market is just terrible. It's hard to find a distribution. I think we have a deal, and we're actually going to get paid in advance, which is unheard of in this environment. But it's very similar to the advance we were paid on the first film in 1988. So unfortunately, I wish I had a different story, but the environment's very similar. It's very depressing to be a backyard, do-it-yourself, micro-budget indie filmmaker these days. And that's why, for many people, self-distribution is becoming the avenue. I don't really have the time to be a self-distributor. I write books, I'm a stay-at-home parent, and just the way that I perceive things being done, I want to go through a distributor. I got a lot of faith in this film. I think as long as I spend enough time nurturing it along, once it is distributed, I think it's going to find an audience.
Okay. And I'm going to pose almost the same kind of question to you, because a lot of your career, you have made low-budget horror films and films that are a nightmare to distribute.
Yes.
What's that like being an actress? Are you kind of sketchy on taking a role, or will you just take something if you like it enough?
Well, those are two different questions. I mean, at one point, you know, when I started, the late 80s, pretty much anything was distributed, you know, as long as it had certain factors to it. Then the 90s came in, and the quality of the scripts were so bad, but you had to make the choice whether you wanted to work or not. So you did a lot of things. Some ended up to be very good, some ended up to be pure exploitation, and some, you know, were just plain unwatchably horrible. And in that case, you were glad that nobody saw them. And the nice thing then, which is a very strange thing to say, is certainly in the late 80s to the early mid-90s, if you made a movie that was just unbearably horrible, like unwatchable horrible, you were pretty certain no one was going to see it anyway. And then the internet came along. And, you know, which is a beautiful thing, it's a wonderful thing, but then now everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, is out there forever and ever and ever. You know, and that includes everything you do, be it, you know, magazines, movies, videos, anything you do is just, it's imprinted forever. It might as well be on a microchip in your brain, and when you go through customs, they can see everything you've ever done. And that's sort of the difference. I think, you know, at the beginning of my career, I took a lot of stuff just to work and to learn how to work, because I was just I sucked so bad when I started, just horrible, horrible. The material was bad, maybe I had potential, but I wasn't good. So it took me a lot of years to find myself and to learn how to be good and how to act in this medium. And then finally, you know, when people would sort of assume, because a popular question is, well, now that you're over 40, what do you want to do with your life? Well, you know, it's interesting to me because now are like the actual best roles that I've ever done and been offered. So it's a strange thing because I feel like saying, well, it took me this long to get the great roles, I'm not going to stop now. And that's sort of where I'm at. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
So, yeah, so to me it's like in the beginning, unless you're like one of the 100 million, thousand, trillion lucky actresses out there that are just absolutely drop-dead gorgeous, absolutely talented, and you're one of those, you can make the choice to never work waiting for an amazing role. You can create your own project, which is a whole nother thing, and I think it's a great thing, but it's a whole another can of worms, you know, to take on something like that. Or you could choose to take some work that you're offered, and certainly back then, that's what you did. You either stayed an unworking actor forever and walked away from it, or you took work that you may not have been completely thrilled about, you know, every time, but you wanted to work, and so that's what I chose to do. I wanted to be a working actor. That was my ultimate goal, and so in order to get there, then that's what I did. So, yeah.
Okay, I'll pose this question to you. The movies in general have changed so much since in between Slime City and Slime City Massacre. How important was it for you to work as much practical makeup effects and do things maybe the way they wouldn't have been done normally now because of starting at that time?
To segue into that, I feel like I'm in a slightly different position than a lot of my fellow micro-budget filmmakers in that I have another creative outlet, which is writing my novels, and I seem to be doing better at that than I ever did as a filmmaker, so I don't feel the pressure to do a film every year, every 2 years, every 3 years. I didn't even think I was going to make this film, and then when I went into this, I went into thinking maybe this will be the last film I make. But when I decided to make this film, one of the advantages was the fact that it was a sequel, and the fans of this film are people who like the films Debbie mentioned earlier, films from the 80s that use practical effects. So that was always part of its design, and we added some CGI, some of which is wonderful, some of which is terrible, and some of which you don't even know is there because it's so flawless, fixing mistakes. So we knew we were going to use the CGI for some effects, and that we were going to use it for the post-apocalyptic ruins. We ended up using it in more places. The bathtub scenes with Debbie, they were a nightmare to shoot. The way we did that is we took 2 cast iron tubs, and in one of them they cut a hole in the side and at the bottom so that Debbie's feet would go out. And they cut a hole in the bottom itself so that her back was at an angle. And they put her in her appliance, positioned her, fit a foam piece over that with a hole in it just so that her face went through. And they poured 2 inches of the slime on top of it so that Lee Perkins could drag his finger through it. And unfortunately, when they put the foam over her appliance, it screwed up the makeup. And during the hour it took to fix that makeup, the only support they'd given her back against a very sharp piece of iron was a pillow that slid out and we couldn't access it. So as we're doing all this, at 6 o'clock every night at the train station where we shot, the abandoned buildings around the train stations, trains would start rolling in too, and I mean long trains. So we were just up against the gun, and there's no way to fix the makeup, and because of our schedule, we had actor A for this long, actor B for this long, actor C for this long.